Fun announcement. I've made it to my 50th state.
So this is a pretty sweet milestone. I mean, for as long as I can remember, I've loved maps, I've loved places, knowing where things are and what's going on in different places. When I was like 2 or 3, my favorite puzzle was this refrigerator magnet set of all 50 states that you could just put together, and I just solved that thing over and over and over again. And now I've been to all of them.
Here's what my journey to 50 states looked like. So I've lived in Illinois, California, Pennsylvania, and Oregon. That means I got to spend a good amount of time visiting some of the neighboring states as well. Road trips in my early 20s sent me to Idaho, Montana, and New England, and a really cool internship took care of most of the heartland for me. I visited Hawaii a bunch of times growing up, most recently in 2016, and in my mid to late 20s I started going to the South more often for all kinds of reasons. Creative conferences, road trips, even my honeymoon, and then there were 5. A weekend trip to Minnesota took care of both Dakotas, and a music festival in Charleston helped me knock West Virginia off that list. In 2019, we got to go to Wyoming, leaving Alaska as the 50th.
And now, we're here.
We're in Alaska, Kai. We should. So we're on this marsh in Chugach State Park right now, and I don't really need to explain this. You can see this is gorgeous.
Of course, there's a reason I saved Alaska for the end. From a geographic standpoint, it's like the most fascinating state, probably because it's so extreme in so many ways. It's so north, and it's so big. It's been really cool. You look off into like the endless woods, and they're actually endless. Here, it's like, no, that forest is just going to keep going all the way to the end of the world, the North Pole.
So we're hiking for about an hour. It's not a difficult hike, but we have 2 babies and a toddler with us, so whatever we do gets a bump up in difficulty. It's a little bit rainy, it's a little bit cold, but it's beautiful. Everything that's green is popping emerald. And then we get there, Byron Glacier, and it's spectacular. Have you ever had a natural setting you were just drawn to? Like, you see pictures of that sort of place in books and magazines and think, man, I would just love it if I could be in that sort of setting. It's glaciers for me. Ice. The far north. Kids are super young, but I don't know, perhaps by the time they are old enough to really appreciate being at a glacier, they will be much harder to find, much harder to visit. And a lot of the spots that are more accessible, like this one, just might not be around. Sad to think about, but I'm glad I got to get them out here while I could.
I think it's important to still have room to enjoy nature, to have a good time exploring a glacier, in spite of the climate crisis. I mean, even if we got everything perfectly right from here on out when it came to climate change, we'd still be making up for lost time. We'd still be dealing with more natural disasters and unpredictability because of things that have already been done. Part of being resilient is learning how to have joy and hold space for the unknown and to do it all. So when in Palmer, Alaska, I just had to take the kids to the muskox farm. And let's be real, this one wasn't just for the kids. I had a blast too. Muskoxen are some great creatures. So these guys are one of the oldest mammals that are still surviving. They made it through the Ice Age some 150,000 years ago. If you listen to the way they growl, they sound like they're from that time period. These are the coolest sounds.
I know.
Their newest threat is climate change, but they actually help their ecosystems be more climate resilient. They like to eat things like young dwarf birch or gray willow, and if they don't eat them, these are tree species that grow really abundantly. They can quickly take over an ecosystem, which makes it harder for less common plants to grow. My time in Alaska was also a friend trip. Being in the thick of adulthood means you don't always get to see your favorite people as often as you like, and I'm finding one of the better ways to make up for that is to just plan more trips with friends. Why choose between your dream trip and a chance to visit friends when you can kind of have both? I actually wanted to spend my 50th state celebrating with a group of friends. Thought it would be cool to get a big house and, yeah, just enjoy each other's company. So we rented this pretty big house, and we got some friends to come along, but mostly we filled it up with kids. Jesse and Raquel, you two are champs for saying yes to taking on this adventure, knowing that you'd have 3 kids under 3 with you in Alaska the whole time. Not everyone would do that. I'm pretty committed now to trying to take as many friend trips as possible. It's perhaps one of my favorite ways to travel. Alaska's got some incredible wildlife, some mind-blowing biodiversity that has managed to find ways to survive in spite of the frigid ecosystem. We spent a little bit of time at the Wildlife Center in Alaska. This was in a spot that some 50 years ago was rocked heavily by the largest earthquake ever recorded in the United States. We're looking at a ghost forest. We're in Girdwood, Alaska, and we're seeing all these trunks of bare trees. Below them, grass grows tall, but the trees themselves, lifeless. Ghost forests are what remains of forests after they've been destroyed, usually by rising waters or earthquakes. Typically, the overhydration and salination kills the tree itself, but the salt water also acts as a preservative, making the trunks linger. They're kind of sad, a bit foreboding. I mean, after all, they're called ghost forests. But there's also an odd beauty to them. While the ghost forest was this odd amalgamation of life and death, it was still cool to see all the creatures gathered around there. The Arctic fox, the reindeer and caribou, porcupine, and of course moose. But you know what? We would see plenty of moose on this trip. The United States is a really complicated country. One thing I've really come to appreciate by seeing people do it well is what does it look like to actually love the place you live. And I think this is pretty different than the brand of patriotism you see right and left. In some ways it makes me think of that James Baldwin quote, like, I love my country more than any other, and because of that I reserve the right to criticize her perpetually. But beyond criticism, I think it's just this commitment to keep working to make it better. You know, I think people often fall into one of two extremes when it comes to loving the United States. One is just looking at it with this zeal that refuses to see anything wrong. When you have that, I think you have a recipe for people loving America as an idea, but not actually loving Americans, showing love, doing things to relieve suffering and make people's lives better. Then there's the other extreme of just trying to completely wash your hands of the country, being abroad and trying to pass yourself off as Canadian, or if you're from New York or California, introducing yourself as from New York or California so that people know you're not one of those Americans. And I get why people do that. If you travel a lot, you'll probably find yourself in a scenario where you're surrounded by like Europeans and Canadians who are just harping on you like, why is the US like this? And you're just like, I don't know, I didn't make that decision, but it is, I have to live with it too. And the other thing is, if you travel a lot, you might see yourself as more of a global citizen and think like, okay, then what's the big deal with like the national identity? And I kind of relate to that. I mean, I see how we're all connected on the planet. And here's the thing, though, that kind of challenged that. I've met so many people who are really, really proud of their countries, who are really, really proud of where they're from and what they call home, in spite of the fact that these are countries that were under dictatorships, under authoritarian leaders who imposed severe human rights violations on minorities. Many of these people I met knew how bad that situation was. They spoke out actively against the problems in their country. But they were still proud of where they were from and all the good things about that. Their sense of belonging to their place, their sense of belonging to where they were from, gave them the drive to keep working on those things. Now that's the kind of ownership I want to have over being from the US, because even though we don't get everything right here, being from this country affords me a lot of privilege and a lot of influence relative to your average person on the world. And I want to make sure I'm using that well. Trip to Seward and get to Kenai Fjords. So this is the Seward Highway. It's 127 miles long and it connects Anchorage with the port city of Seward, located at the tip of the Kenai Peninsula by Kenai Fjords National Park. It's been said by many to be the most dangerous highway in Alaska, and I guess by default that kind of makes it the most dangerous highway in the United States. There were curves and 2 lanes, but it seemed pretty manageable. Then later that day, we ran into some moose. Well, almost. It was night and it was a very close call. One of the things I absolutely had to do while in Alaska was get on a kayak and try and do some rowing out near the fjords. From everything I've seen of the Kenai Fjords in pictures, they looked stunning. The sudden crags of land just bursting out of the water like fingertips, and occasionally seeing glaciers or blocks of ice around the Resurrection Bay, around the Kenai Fjords, made me really want to just be there. We had a little mix-up of plans, and this almost didn't happen, but okay, this has got to be the best selfie I've ever taken. Otter selfie. With one last day in Alaska, we decided to spend some time around Anchorage. We hadn't really seen a whole lot of the city just yet. First stop, Moose's Tooth Pizzeria for what's been called the 4th best pizza in the United States. How you eat at enough pizza parlors to get a representative sample, I'm not sure, and I am pretty jealous of whoever is tasked with figuring that out. And I will say, this is some real good pizza. Downtown Anchorage has some pretty interesting things going on when it comes to their street art and murals. Alright, let me show you one of the coolest pieces of art right now in downtown Anchorage. This piece was done by a Filipino Athabascan artist as part of the Alaska Mural Project. Before, there was a piece here that depicted more of the settler history of Alaska. But you know, there's way too much of that sort of art and history around town. What about more of the native history? State number 50. This was a long time coming. What's funny is, now that I've been to all 50, I think about where is it that I'm most eager to see again, to go back to, or to see more of, and I honestly think, recency bias aside, that answer might be Alaska. I would love to see Fairbanks. I would love to see the spots where you're so far north, things get a bit unusual. I find such a strong sense of connection to Arctic climates, to that black Arctic soil. Can't wait to see more of it.